Do you remember your first love, the school crush? Do you remember sitting there, thinking about the object of your affection, feeling emotions you had never known before, the inspiration you didn't know existed? Then surely you also remember the first time your heart was broken, shattered dreams due to a betrayal in life. Our first romantic experience undoubtedly shapes and has a tremendous impact on any teenager. Most of us quickly recover even after the worst breakup. But what if your first love, which allowed you to taste the sweetness of life like never before, ultimately destroyed you? Spring, 2011. Summerfield, a quiet little town in central Florida. For teenagers living here, it was perhaps too quiet. The town had 2 stores, a movie theater, and a skate park, but mostly it was just fields, and more fields. In other words, local kids had nothing to occupy themselves with and could easily get into trouble if they didn't surround themselves with kids from decent families. Local boy Seth Jackson was a handsome and popular 15-year-old student, quite tall for his age. He and his best friend, William Samuelat, enjoyed riding bikes, skateboarding, and were passionate about martial arts. Seth was an excellent student and dreamed of pursuing a professional career in wrestling after turning 18, and his future looked very promising. On Monday, April 11th, the students of Summerfield gathered at their desks after the weekend and quickly noticed that their friend Seth was absent. William and Seth had planned to meet up after classes, and William sent him several messages that went unanswered. Seth didn't respond to his persistent calls either. The prolonged silence from his friend surprised William, and finally, he decided to call Seth's mother. As it turned out, Seth's parents assumed that he had spent the night at William's house. Concerned, they contacted the police. The police didn't rush to sound the alarm about the 15-year-old teenager, but officers came to talk to his parents. Seth's mother mentioned that the last time she had been in contact with him was at 9:15 p.m. She asked if he needed a ride home, to which he responded sharply and rudely. It was extremely unusual for him to speak to his mother that way, as he had never done so before. He texted that he wouldn't be staying at home and would spend the night with friends. Sonia didn't know what had upset her son so much. However, she attributed it to teenage mood swings and decided not to argue over the phone but to talk to him when he returned home. The abrupt messages only confirmed the officers' suspicions that Seth had simply run away from home and would soon return. But they had to make sure, and to find the boy, they needed to understand what had been happening in his life recently. The parents gave the police permission to examine their son's phone records. They also provided the detectives with a list of Seth's friends, mentioning that he had broken up with a girl a few weeks ago and probably hadn't fully recovered from the breakup. She might know something. The girl's name is Amber Wright. Her 16-year-old brother, Kyle, is also an old friend of Seth's, so it was definitely worth talking to these kids. That's where the detectives headed next, to their house. They explained to Amber, who opened the door, the reason for their visit and asked if she knew where Seth might be. As it turned out, she had seen him the previous evening. They chatted a bit when Seth started arguing with his mother on the phone, and then he went home. Charlie Lee, Amber's friend, was with them. 18-year-old Charlie was married and rented out rooms in her house because her husband ended up in prison, and she needed to support herself somehow. Since she had had a falling out with her family over her husband, whom they didn't like, she must have felt lonely, and she quickly became friends with Amber. As Charlie was present during the conversation, the detectives needed to interview the 2 witnesses separately. They decided to talk to the girls individually. During the conversation, Charlie reiterated Amber's story but added one unexpected detail. Seth was texting with his mother when suddenly he heard a loud sound resembling a gunshot. Charlie stated that she didn't know what the source of the sound was, but Seth suddenly started running down the road. This was a shocking revelation, as if it truly was a gunshot, could Seth have been running to save his life? Especially since, at some distance from them, The girl saw a person who could have been shooting at Seth. She wasn't sure if he was armed, but she believed it was Michael Bargo, Amber's new boyfriend. Michael was 18 years old and rented a room from Charlie, which is how he met Amber. When the officers spoke to Amber again, she denied everything her friend had said. It was clear that one of the girls was lying. The only thing their testimonies coincided on was that both of them saw the boy the previous evening, and didn't know where he was now or where the police could find Michael Bargo. But it wasn't just the police who were looking for Seth. William went to talk to Amber, where he encountered detectives coming out of her house. They asked him when he had last seen his friend. Unexpectedly, William also stated that he was with Seth yesterday. They were hanging out at a mutual friend's house with a small group of guys, playing video games and having a great time when Seth received a message and went to talk on the phone. It was Amber. William overheard part of the conversation. The girl assured Seth that she wanted to reconcile with him and asked for a meeting. Despite their breakup, Seth still loved her and couldn't get her out of his head. William asked him not to meet with Amber but wasn't sure if he would listen. That was the last time William saw his friend. The police heard 3 different versions of what happened the previous evening from Amber, Charlie, and William. But William's concern deeply affected the detectives. They were no longer certain that the boy had simply run away. Additionally, they found it strange that Amber didn't mention her phone call to Seth. The search for the boy continued. The detectives still hadn't been able to talk to 2 members of the group, Kyle and Michael Bargo. Michael was an 18-year-old guy who had graduated from school but preferred to surround himself with younger students, among whom he felt more confident. Checking Bargo's records, the detectives discovered that he had previous encounters with the police and had been found in possession of weapons. Furthermore, he had a court order prohibiting him from approaching another teenager. The police became more eager to speak with him. William, continuing his own investigation, returned to Amber's house. They used to be friends, but when Amber broke up with his best friend, William no longer trusted her. He demanded to know where his friend was. Amber initially resisted, but when he insisted that she not lie to him, she said, "William, there are things you don't need to know," and asked him to leave. This did not appease him at all. He was now certain that his friend's disappearance was somehow related to his breakup with Amber, but he didn't know the details. The pieces of this puzzle refused to come together. Luckily, teenagers always leave a digital trail, and the most important clues that helped reconstruct the details of Seth's disappearance were indeed digital. Seth used to spend a lot of time online, and his social media profiles contained a lot of personal information. Seth and Amber started dating in December 2010. Things escalated quickly, and their relationship was constantly on display for everyone to see on social media. But it didn't last long. Suddenly, after 3 months of intense dating, Amber abruptly broke up with Seth without giving him any explanation. Seth was deeply hurt, feeling both pain and resentment. However, his hurt turned into anger when he found out that Amber quickly found a replacement and started dating Michael Bargo. He felt betrayed by her and started an online war on Facebook, which was witnessed by all of their acquaintances. Insults were exchanged, and at some point, Michael and Amber's brother, Kyle, joined in the conversation. Amber, visibly upset by how Seth was talking about her online, told Kyle and Michael that Seth had humiliated her. It was clear that nobody would come out as a winner in this feud. But in late March, what was once an online rivalry escalated into a real-life confrontation. Seth learned that Amber had attended a party with Bargo and headed there himself. He not only had no fear of Bargo but also knocked him down with a single blow. For Bargo, it was a severe blow to his reputation to be defeated by a 15-year-old boy in front of all his friends, and he vowed to seek revenge on Seth. Even Seth's mother personally heard Michael tell her son that he had a bullet with Seth's name on it. The detectives wondered if the boy could have snapped because of this entire situation and run away from town. William searched for his friend relentlessly but couldn't find any leads. The police also made no progress until the next morning. On Tuesday morning, the police received a phone call that completely changed the course of the case. The detectives hadn't spoken to the woman who called before, but they were familiar with her last name. It was Amber and Kyle's mother. She seemed distraught and asked the police to speak with her son. During the interrogation at the police station, it became evident that Kyle was deeply traumatized by some event. He couldn't calm down, held his head in his hands, stuttered, and couldn't begin his account. Finally, he confirmed the worst fears of the police. He revealed that on the night of Seth's disappearance, he was at Charlie Lee's house along with Seth, Charlie, Michael Bargo, Amber, and Justin Soto, another tenant in the house. When Seth arrived at the house, Michael Bargo unexpectedly killed him. After speaking with Kyle, the detectives interviewed Amber. The girl quickly composed herself and explained that she was too scared during her initial conversation with the police. She did everything she could to appear as innocent as possible in the events that transpired. Charlie, just like Kyle and Amber, also blamed Bargo for everything. The police continued their search for the suspected killer. However, the detectives believed that they were not being told the whole truth. After individually questioning the teenagers, they were all brought into a shared room and left alone. Although they should have known that the police could have cameras and microphones anywhere, the suspects seemed to forget about it every time. The teens started talking. It turned out that each of them played a role in Seth's murder. However, it was evident that they didn't fully comprehend the gravity of their actions or the consequences that would follow. They were concerned about the story making headlines and people hating them. At one point, Amber complained that when she gets out of jail, she'll be 20 years old. It was a rather arrogant statement. 5 years for a heinous first-degree murder. During the following days, the investigators would scrutinize the teenagers' social media accounts and examine the data from their phones, uncovering truly horrifying details of Seth's final hours of life. It was evident that Michael Bargo was the one who had the idea to kill Seth. He shared this idea with Amber, who instead of dissuading him, agreed to it. She was angry with Seth and, in a way, had set up the stage for this scene herself. Thus, her role was to lure Seth into the trap and warn the other three waiting inside with a message. When Seth entered the house, Justin Soto was supposed to attack him from the front, while Kyle and Michael Bargo would approach from behind and beat him. After enjoying the beating, because that was precisely their plan, to derive pleasure from beating the boy, they intended to kill him. Bargo wanted Seth to remain conscious until the end, to know who had fired the fatal shot. It was a meticulously planned crime. On Sunday evening around 7 p.m., Amber contacted Seth and asked to meet up, explaining that she wanted to reconcile and start dating him again. Seth, who still loved Amber, was overjoyed by her messages. However, he found her sudden change in mood suspicious and asked her if she was planning to set him up for revenge by her boyfriend. Of course, she denied such intentions, claiming she would never do that to him. Seth had reasons to suspect Amber's deceit. A few weeks earlier, Michael and Kyle had proposed a meeting to Seth and William to resolve their differences. The boys agreed, but when they were nearing the meeting spot, they heard a gunshot and naturally turned back. It was later revealed that Kyle had fired the shot. It seemed that he wanted to make Seth and William understand that they were armed and perhaps wanted to avoid a fight. Nonetheless, Seth chose to ignore his instincts and agreed to meet Amber because he still loved her. After bidding William goodbye, he headed to the meeting place at around 9 p.m. The trap was set. However, something didn't go according to plan at first. Seth met Amber and Charlie at the designated spot, and the girls convinced him to go to Charlie's house. As they approached the house with Seth, Amber intentionally or unintentionally failed to inform her accomplices that they were already close. When Seth calmly entered the house, Justin didn't immediately attack him. Perhaps he still hoped it was all a failed prank. Unaware of the impending danger, Seth calmly sat in the room, preparing to hear what Amber allegedly wanted to say to him. Suddenly, Kyle burst in from behind and struck Seth on the head with a wooden axe handle, while Bargo shot him twice in the back. However, Seth managed to open the door and escape outside. This is where Justin, who initially refrained from attacking Seth, intervened. He stopped Seth, and the three of them dragged the wounded teenager back into the house. Astonishingly, Charlie Lee, their neighbor, witnessed the events but dismissed them as a teenage fight. Meanwhile, the teenagers placed Seth in the bathtub and left him alone with Michael Bargo. If only he had called the police. While the others took cleaning supplies and washed the house, Bargo cruelly tormented him for hours, beating and even shooting him. Fully satisfied with his vengeance, he shot directly into the teenager's handsome face. He wanted to take from him what he himself didn't have. It was an execution. Michael wanted the victim to experience pain, humiliation, and fear. It's difficult to imagine what was going on in Seth's mind at that moment, the agony he endured in the last hours of his life. At some point, Kyle entered the bathroom and pleaded with Bargo to stop, not out of sudden remorse but because he feared that the neighbors would hear the noise and call the police. However, for Seth, it was all over. Now, the killers had a body they needed to get rid of. They had a sleeping bag ready. Seth was quite tall, so they broke his kneecaps and tied him to fit inside it. The criminals had already lit a bonfire. They threw the boy into the fire. The flames were so powerful that neighbors came twice to check on the teenagers if everything was all right, but it didn't scare them. On the contrary, if planning a brutal murder, carrying it out, and deciding to burn a human body weren't enough, now they had a party around the bonfire, playing music, dancing, and drinking. Apparently, the smell that should have come from the fire didn't bother them at all. And when everyone went to sleep, Kyle kept the fire going until 2:30 in the morning and calmly went to work the next day. But there's still more horrifying details in this case. In the morning, James Haven, Amber, and Kyle's stepfather, came to help the guys get rid of the boy's remains. They placed what was left of Seth in containers and took them to a quarry where they threw them into the water. It turns out that the 37-year-old man was aware of the teenagers' plan all along because he had been hanging out with them the previous evening. However, when they started discussing the fate of Seth, he felt uncomfortable and left. When the police obtained a warrant and searched the crime scene, forensic experts found bones and the weapon in the fire. The rest was retrieved from the water in the nearby quarry. They eventually found Michael Bargo at his friend and her parents' house. After the boy's sudden disappearance, the whole town was on edge, and Bargo decided to flee the city. But he didn't go into hiding, as one might assume. Haven drove Bargo to his girlfriend, to whom he immediately confessed everything. He then confessed about the murder to her father, his girlfriend, and even his son. He even admitted to one of the family's neighbors. When he was arrested on April 19th, he immediately spilled all the details to his cellmates, and one of them promptly told the police. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. Perhaps he truly didn't grasp the seriousness of the crime because, as it turned out, he suffered from a range of mental issues. Maybe with timely intervention, all of this could have been avoided. Due to the incredible cruelty of the crime, all the teenagers were tried as adults. They were all sentenced to life in prison. James Haven was tried as an accomplice. At the trial, Michael Bargo tried to claim that he didn't kill anyone, and that he was just at Charlie's house. He stated that someone else among the teenagers likely committed the murder. He even claimed that Amber was never his girlfriend. However, the jury didn't believe him. They deliberated for only 4 hours. Since he showed no mercy to his victim, they followed his example and sentenced him to the death penalty. Bargo became the youngest person on death row in Florida. The convicts tried to appeal, but it was only successful in Charlie's case. She was released in 2019. Despite the fact that it was Bargo who fired the bullet that killed Seth Jackson, many can't shake the thought of the role Amber truly played. If not for her manipulations, Seth would be alive today. By accusing her ex-boyfriend of being rude to her, she loaded the weapon that ultimately fired. However, regardless of who was the mastermind of the crime, the fact remains it was a cruel, senseless, and heartless murder committed by a group of heartless teenagers.